And we're back. This is episode 10. Can you believe we've made it all the way to number 10, Matt?
Number 10, that's exciting. Milestone. Every week's a milestone for us.
So this is Tech Time podcast. We are talking about Huawei launching the Mate 20 Pro today. As well, we're going to talk about Samsung's new foldable phone and how it might actually be a tablet that you can put in your pocket. Paul Allen, the Microsoft co-founder, is dead at 65. Facebook is testing an Unsent feature for Messenger, and Google is fined $5 billion by the European Union. It looks like we have a pretty good lineup today. So how are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing pretty good, Dan. How about you?
Pretty good. I was just fighting Los Angeles traffic right now. It was insane. Have you ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off when he's running from his mom and sister in the car?
Love that movie. That's how it was.
That's how it was. There was people with walkers coming left and right, trying to get in front of me. But thankfully I made it in time to do this podcast.
I think it would have been awesome if there was a parade that just started going down the street. You jumped up on the float and started singing. That would have been awesome.
Either that, or maybe I could have gotten one of those bird scooters and gotten my way through the parade.
Yes.
That's more likely. How about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. It's been a busy week, both at work and, of course, rebuilding the condo that burned down. So it's kind of nice to just think about the tech news and unwind.
All right, well, let's unwind to Huawei's new Mate 20 Pro. Now, I want you to tell us a little bit about this, and will it be something that we can even buy here in North America?
Well, yes, but only I can. So I don't think you'll be able to. So Huawei's products come to Canada. The United States has had a problem with Huawei just because of some of the executive owners happen to also be former Chinese military and with extreme ties to the government. So the United States is concerned about spying and hardware. And I personally think it's maybe a little bit of protectionism for Apple. I'm not sure. But for whatever reasons, the whole rest of the world doesn't seem to be afraid of Huawei's phones except for the United States. So this is the P20. Now, what's really neat is it's a great phone, but also the P30, which Huawei releases every year as well, tends to be their big flagship device. I would probably compare it to, say, the Note 9 or the Note series for Samsung. But the 20 always comes out this time of year, and then the 30 usually comes out the following year in the spring. So the 30 that came out this year was the first three camera phone, and it was doing amazing things in low light, as well as having a telephoto lens. And it's been an all-around great phone, specifically for the camera. So the new Mate 20, this one also comes with three cameras, and it is the best phone that Huawei produces now. If you want to wait for an even better phone, I prefer the 30, but this is a pretty neat phone. It is feature-packed. I personally feel like it's got too many features. So, for example, it has an in-screen fingerprint sensor, which is great, but it also has the infrared giant notch that Apple has to send out those little infrared dots to do Face ID. So I almost feel like Huawei couldn't commit to one way or the other to unlock the phone. So you've got giant notch and you have an in-screen fingerprint sensor. I would have thought maybe you can bring the price point down a little bit by just focusing on one or the other. So we do know that OnePlus will be focusing more on the in-screen fingerprint sensor. But this one has both. So if you like that, if you like the options, and you know what? Maybe it's more useful when you're driving to just smile at your phone and have it unlock. I guess we'll have to test it.
I like that it has both, actually. I mean, some people might feel a little more comfortable with their fingerprint, but other people might like the face one.
Well, Huawei says they are protecting your face information, right? Because
in China.
Yeah, in China. In China, of course, the United States government doesn't feel that that's very protected. And also your fingerprint information. I mean, that's important. If you think about it, these phones are collecting our fingerprints. That's kind of interesting. They're collecting our biometric identification. Do we care about that? I don't know if we've had much discussion on that on this show, but we're putting a lot of trust in these companies, and some of these companies may come and go. And what happens if Huawei, now I don't think Huawei will disappear, but what about some of the smaller ones that we may be testing and trying, and then what happens to all that intellectual information when the company is sold or bought out, and who can buy it, and is that something we really want? So maybe the U.S. government might be right to be a little bit hesitant, but I personally feel it's a little bit of protectionism.
Well, I think it could be sold to the highest bidder. I mean, really, that's where they're making most of their money, is off of our information and our data. And like you said, now that they have our biometrics, that's even more so.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I use my fingerprint to get into my banking information on my phone. So if somebody sold my fingerprint to somebody else and all you had to do was hack the phone to trick it and say, okay, now you're into my bank, now you can transfer funds, you can do all
And they could
kinds of things.
even own that condo in Fort McMurray that you love so much, right?
Please come and
Hack
own
my
my
phone.
condo. Hack it. So let's get into some of the specs on this phone. It's actually it's a beautiful phone. It's quite large, actually. It's a 6.39-inch QHD OLED screen. It's huge. It's gigantic. But actually, they have a smaller, more budget-friendly model that is not an OLED screen. It's an LCD screen, and it's actually a little bit bigger, and it's got a little tiny notch. It doesn't have the face recognition. It's got the teardrop notch that we've seen in the P6, the OnePlus 6 phones that are coming out here. The battery is huge. This is a 4,200 milliamp battery. And
that is huge.
It is huge, and there's something really neat about the battery, but let's go through some of the other specs, and then I want to get back to the battery. So it also has Huawei's Kirin 980 processor. So this is the first that Huawei's been able to produce at 7 nanometers. Now, as you noted in this article, they're matching Apple's A12 chips from the 2018 phone. So this is pretty neat. And it's their own proprietary chip, so they can manufacture it to be special on the Huawei phones.
How do they do that? How are they, are they copying Qualcomm? Are they copying Apple? How are they making their own processor?
Honestly, I don't know. I know that Samsung in the past has created their own processors. I know that they do it for their watches, their smartwatches. They've also created their own operating systems to go along with it. Huawei also released a smartwatch today that doesn't use Wear OS and does their own operating system. So I guess we'll have to see whether Qualcomm, which has all the money, or ARM has quite a bit of funding, has been around forever, if they can stay on top, or if some of these more proprietary chips like Apple has done can actually take over and be quite competitive. But it sounds like it just may be, and I guess we'll have to see how tests and speed tests go on these phones.
You know, it's fascinating. I've noticed a trend. I don't know if you've noticed this, that it seems like Google is moving away from Android and they're going more towards Chrome OS. And I wonder if maybe Huawei is using Android, and if there might be a fork in the road in the near future where Google starts to go more towards Chrome and everyone else is going to just be left with an old fork of Android.
You know, that's an interesting thought. And personally, let's simplify. Why have Android and Chrome OS? I get it that Chrome OS is for Chromebooks and it's supposed to be more of your desktop computing software made simple, but it uses the Play Store, right? So, why have two? Let's just create one. And let's make it seamless between the phones and the computers. I mean, my phone's practically a computer already. And for the prices we're paying for these phones, it's the same as what we'd pay for a computer anyways. And so I think we're going to see the lines blurring. We saw the lines blur between tablets and phones, and now we're going to see phones and computers blur. We're already seeing it with Samsung, and I'm trying to remember the feature they have where you can plug your new Samsung phone into a screen, and it will mimic. Yeah, and it mimics a desktop. So, give it a few more years, and I think that maybe we will see a unification between the operating systems on phones and desktops. So, let's talk about the cameras, and then let's get back to the battery, because this is kind of the neat feature that if it might be the feature that people run out and buy it for. So you've still got your 3 cameras. You got a 40 megapixel standard camera on the back. You have an 8 megapixel telephoto camera. Love the telephoto, Dan. I am not a fan of digital zoom, although Pixel 3 had a really interesting way of doing the enhanced feature that we talked about last week. So that's great to have the 3 times optical zoom, and it has, this is new, a 20 megapixel ultra wide angle camera. So you're going to see like arms reaching around and like grabbing bigger selfies.
Perverts rejoice. Just take a picture of the apartment complex next to you and zoom in.
Rejoice. Okay, so let's talk about the really neat thing about this phone, the feature. It will allow you, so not only will it have wireless charging, but it will also wirelessly charge other phones.
How is that possible? Like a network of charging?
Yeah, so it actually showed that if you picked up this phone and put another phone that can wirelessly charge onto the back of it, it will charge that phone. So at first I thought, why? Well, here's a few reasons. Number one, it's a huge battery. It's 4,200 milliamps. That's pretty big. Number two, what about having your phone plugged into the wall and then somebody else's phone attached to it wirelessly charging off of that?
That would be cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. So if you're traveling somewhere with a friend, then, juice up both phones at once if there's only one outlet. Also think about sneaking up next to your friend and your battery's about to die, and you could just sort of vampire life drain
Also, am I going to get cancer by being close to this chain of air connected chargers?
I don't know. People have been worried about cell phones and cancer for decades now, so we'll see.
Oh, you should put it right next to your head while you're charging you and your wife's phone while you're sleeping and see what happens.
So, Dan, have you heard how much this phone's going to cost?
Well, I'm guessing since it's not the iPhone 10, less than 1,000. How much is it?
It is, so it's 1,049 euros, and I threw it into exchange just to see what it comes out to. $1,214 US.
That's a laptop, my friend.
Yes, it is. So I guess you gotta have deep pockets if you want to wirelessly charge your buddy's phone. Like I said, there is a cheaper version of the phone that doesn't have the Face ID, doesn't have the OLED screen, has a little bit smaller battery, but the actual phone itself, the footprint is a little bit bigger. Maybe that's the one people are going to go for. Personally, I'm going to wait around for the P30 that will come out next year, see how that goes. But man, if they're going to keep at this price point, I'm kind of surprised, actually.
So just so I'm clear about it, the one that doesn't have the Face ID still has the fingerprint reader in the screen, and it's cheaper and has less of a notch. That's the one I'm going to buy, right?
Yeah, but I didn't actually throw that one through exchange. It could still be $1,000. I hope not. Not for an LCD screen, but yeah.
Hey, speaking of cool screens, Samsung, remember how we talked about this before? They say that their new foldable phone will be a tablet you can put in your pocket. So remember about 4 or 5 episodes back, we had talked about the rumors we had heard about Samsung having a foldable screen, and we thought, well, what would be useful about that? Would you fold it and have a calculator on one side, maybe a daily planner on the other? Like, why would you want a foldable phone?
Yeah.
And so now they're saying it's actually going to be a tablet that you can just fold and put in your pocket. So, for example, if you had a tablet in front of you, it might be awkward to put in a bag. You can't put a tablet in a pocket, but if you folded it up, that could be convenient, right?
Yeah, I guess if it's a tablet first and then a phone second, I think that's kind of the issue that you've got to ask yourself is what is the purpose of this device? And it was kind of the same question we had to ask ourselves when phablets first came out. I remember
Which you love.
I do love it. And I remember my first note. It was the very first note that came out. And Dan, when all the other phones were small, like the iPhone 4, it looked like I put a dinner plate to my head. Like, I remember I was out at lunch and my phone rang and I picked up my Note 1 and I put it to my head and everybody started laughing. They're like, Matt, it's like you put a dinner plate to your head.
The whole restaurant stopped eating.
Yeah, they were like, that is ridiculous.
Silverware crashed on the ground.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do like the form factor that Samsung's putting out now. It's more of a candy bar shape. It's not nearly as wide as that original Note. So it fits better in your hand. It's easier to one-hand use, but it took them a while to get to that form factor. So I don't know. What do you think? Do you think people will buy it as a tablet first and then, oh, it's a foldable tablet, not necessarily a phone?
Yeah, and it sounds to me like it's really just for storage too, right? You'll fold it and be able to put it in convenient places. Ko, he's kind of the person that always talks about the new Samsung products. He says he's hoping this isn't going to be a gimmick product, that it's actually going to be something that people will want to buy. I mean, women have purses. It's easy for them to throw big electronics in and be on the go. But for us, I mean, we only have a front pocket. Imagine if you could take a tablet-sized thing that was thin that you could fold up and just pull out anywhere. That would be pretty neat.
It would be sweet for the plane. It would be sweet for work. I mean, yeah, I think it would be great. I got to see what it looks like when it's folded up. But you know, I'm going to reserve any judgment until I actually see the phone. I'm looking forward to this one.
They say it's going to be more than 6.5 inches, which is, I mean, your phone's like around that, isn't it?
Yeah, 6.5 to 6.9 is kind of the average for phablets right now. Nothing really goes over 7 inches. So if this foldable actually takes you into that 7 to 8 inch region, but then allows you to have the form factor of a phone when it's folded, I think it could be kind of groundbreaking. I personally like a bigger screen. That's why I've always loved phablets. But, you know, we'll see. And you know, Dan, there was actually another phone that was announced this week by Palm. And
really? They're still out there?
Well, yeah. And I can't remember who bought the rights to Palm, but it's the complete opposite of this giant phablet that Samsung's trying to create. It's a tiny little phone. And it's actually ridiculous. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but the whole purpose of the new Palm phone is to wean you off your smartphone addiction.
Okay.
So it's small.
Buy
so
your
you're not
phone to stop using phones.
Yeah, that's exactly. So it's like, so I'm gonna buy a phone to stop using my phone. But the whole idea is, well, it's Android and it's on this tiny little screen. Kind of reminds me of Zoolander when he had that tiny little phone. And so it's like, am I really going to get on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube on this tiny little phone? So that's kind of their idea. I think it's gimmicky. And it's also really silly because they're like, look, it fits better in those sports armbands that you put on and go to the gym in. And I was
Which nobody uses.
I actually see one guy at the gym using it. I think it looks silly, but just get a smartwatch.
Yes.
It does the same
Get
thing
the
and
Apple
it's
Watch.
even better.
Listen to our podcast about the Apple Watch. It sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
So some sad news. I believe it was yesterday that Paul Allen, the Microsoft co-founder, died, right, at 65?
I actually heard about it today. So maybe it was last night, but I heard it this morning coming into work. Yeah, so cancer was the cause of his death, and so a lot of people are talking about the things that Paul Allen did. One of the things that I found quite interesting was a quote from Bill Gates. He said, quote, "Personal computing would not have existed without Paul Allen." So for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with Paul Allen, both he and Bill Gates were in the same private school. And then they went on to college, but they had their dreams to create their own software company in high school. And I think they kind of convinced each other that we don't need no college educations. Let's go become billionaires. So together they created Microsoft.
Hey, that's pretty exciting. And he for sure was a philanthropist and gave a lot of his money away and did some wonderful things with his billions, right?
He did. So some of the things he's done, there's the Allen Institute for Brain Science. He also created the aerospace firm Stratolaunch, which it actually created this giant airplane to launch satellites into space. He also backed research into nuclear fusion power. He also is quite well known for loving sports. So he's owned the Portland Trail Blazers and the Seattle Seahawks.
Very cool.
He was still a billionaire. What's interesting is he got out of Microsoft in the 80s, and Microsoft really boomed at the end of the 80s and throughout the 90s. So you could say, well, he missed that giant wave, kind of like Wozniak missed the Apple wave. But actually, he still came out of it a billionaire. I mean, if he was worth $1 billion in the early 80s when he got out, he definitely had the cash to buy some sports teams and be a philanthropist and research nuclear fusion. So good on him. The world will miss him. And we need more people like him that will create groundbreaking inventions that will just change the course of the world for good.
And that we can give our billions to. Let's make some more billionaires, right?
Let's make some more billionaires.
Speaking of people that are billionaires, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook. So here's a feature that I think is pretty funny that's taken forever to come out with. Do you ever use Facebook Messenger and you send somebody a text and then you immediately regret it and then you delete it and you realize it only was deleted on your end and not on their end? They can still see it.
You're like, undo.
So they're finally working on this feature, an Unsent feature. I mean, how hard could it be, right?
Right.
But I actually have a pretty funny story about it. I have a friend that confessed her love to a doctor at work, and then 5 seconds later, and 5 seconds later regretted it, and she deleted it and thought, oh, it's fine. And then the next day, everything was really awkward because, of course, on his end, it never deleted.
He's like, so that was weird.
So, I mean, it's funny if you think about all of the different technologies we have. We have email. You can't unsend an email. You have text messages. Once the text is sent, it's gone. And so it's a little bit silly to me that even Messenger, WhatsApp, it's ridiculous that you can't delete something that you've already sent. So I'm excited about this feature just for future embarrassing things that you might do.
Although it's always fun at the office when something like that happens. I think it was like podcast number 2 or 3 where I shared the story about the guy that sent the drunken email in the middle of the night that was like, and I'm not drunk. And of course,
and all you can do is write that email that says, please don't open that other email.
Exactly. Actually, did you know that Gmail now has an undo function? I believe it's been live for a couple months now. And so it basically delays sending. So you can set how long you want to wait until it sends it off. But that's really all it is.
I was going to say maybe you can try it first because I don't trust it.
Undo. Wouldn't that be great if there was an undo button for life decisions?
Yes. I think I would have undone a lot of my student loans. Undo.
I think I would have sold my condo before it burned down.
That's right. We all would have invested in Apple back in the 90s.
We'd all be billionaires and we'd all own sports teams.
And be philanthropists, Matt. Of course,
that's right.
We're not going to hoard all the money. Speaking of money, Google was fined $5 billion by the European Union. Tell me about what's going on with that. Is it from the Google Play Store or what's going on there?
So this one's actually been in the works in the courts in the European Union for quite some time. I remember reading about it, I'd say maybe even 2 years ago. So here's the argument that the European Union says. 80% of the world's smartphones are on Android. And that is a huge market. And every single one of these Android phones comes with preloaded Google apps. And that's actually by design because Android, or should I say Google, says we, developers of phones, we will give you our software for free. But in order for you to get it for free, you have to use our apps, such as Google Search and it comes with Chrome. And by the way, any
Photos. Yeah.
photos, maps, and anybody who has that phone or buys the phone, they can delete and put other apps as they so choose. So it's not like they're forcing the end user to use their apps, but they come preloaded. So what the EU said is, well, this is unfair. If 80% of the phones in Europe come with your apps preloaded, that's not allowing innovation and allowing smaller companies the opportunity to have their day in the sun. Now, you could argue that the reason why Android apps are so huge, like YouTube, how many millions, if not billions, of people use YouTube? You need that economies of scale to make it worthwhile. Same with your ad revenue. So we talked about this in the past. So it can be really hard for third-party apps to be able to take on Android. So here's what's interesting. So Google shot back and they said, okay, you hit us with $5 billion and we understand what you're saying. So now what we're going to do is any Android phone that is going to be sold in the European Union will have to pay a licensing fee.
Oh.
So the producer of the phone, whether it be Huawei, Xiaomi, Samsung, the manufacturer of the phone will have to pay a licensing fee for every single one of the phones that go to the EU. And that sounds like Google's kind of being a little bit snarky, saying, well, if you're not going to use the whole reason why we create Android to be free in the first place, then you got to pay us for it. And that actually makes sense to me. And actually, this is exactly what the European Union wanted. They wanted the smartphone manufacturers to be incentivized to innovate and to create competitors. So what do you think, Dan? Do you think this is going to work? Or do you think people are just going to sideload the Play Store? Because that's a Google app. These phones won't even come with the Play Store. So,
well, here's what I'm hoping. Samsung's working on Tizen, their own phone operating system. I'm hoping that, they'll start to innovate that. But the problem that we have, like you were talking about before, is that the Google Play Store needs to be a central place for everyone to get their apps. If you start segregating it all, it's going to be almost impossible to find the apps you want. And especially as an app developer, it's so annoying to release it for the Google Play Store and for Apple iTunes and for all the different things. And if Samsung makes their own store and if OnePlus makes their own store, it's going to get really complicated. But it could drive innovation. And, with all capitalism, the fastest and the strongest wins. And so eventually it's going to come out as one company's going to have it all anyways. So it's kind of a circle.
This kind of reminds me of another article that we researched but never did, and it's all about how there's so much competition in the streaming world, so competition with Netflix. Disney now is coming out with their own movie and TV app, and you've got
HBO
Hulu,
Go,
Amazon Prime, right? Also,
yes, has the Star Trek ones.
Yeah, so what it's doing is because there's so much competition, people are starting to go to BitTorrent again. And in fact, when Netflix got big, people stopped torrenting. I don't want to have any admission on any
Yeah, I've never seen you torrent before, Matt.
No.
Not at your house.
But I definitely would have been less likely to torrent because everything I needed was on Netflix. But now I can't go get Star Trek on Netflix. I can get the old stuff, but I can't get the new stuff. And people who want to watch Games of Thrones has to go to HBO. And people who want Man in the High Tower have to go to Amazon Prime. So they have all this specialized content, and what it's doing is it's pushing people back to piracy. So it's kind of the same thing with trying to create these new operating systems. Is the world better off with more operating systems in the mobile device sphere, or are we better off with a few really good choices? And then is it the same thing with streaming our television and movies? Are we better off with 2 or 3 giants, Or are we better off with this smorgasbord that's going to cost us the same as having cable in the first place if we want to watch it all?
Well, it's frustrating because of the money, right? I mean, obviously, I want there to only be one store, but that would mean only one company would get all of the money, and it would be impossible to break into that monopoly. And so, if you're asking what's best for the consumer, one store is the best. If you're asking what's best for all of us, it's several stores, or else it'll just be impossible in the future for anyone to break in.
I guess we'll let the invisible hand decide and see what
Adam
happens.
Smith.
So,
right.
Dan, I've got some really interesting news. I want to get political. I want to get into crime. So this is like true crime type of stuff, mixes with technology. And I see we've got a few minutes left, so I'll try to make it as quick as possible. Did you hear?
I think I want to hear this story because is it about the embassy where that guy died?
Yes. Are you familiar? So his name is Jamal Khashoggi. Are you familiar with him and what happened to him?
No, I just know that he and his girlfriend or fiance went to the consulate and then he disappeared and never came out, right? That's all I know.
Yeah, so he's a journalist, and he used to be quite pro-Saudi Arabia. That's his home country. But within the last few years, he's actually been quite anti the current king and crown prince. And so he's actually left Saudi Arabia for his own safety and has been living in the United States, I believe in Vermont. But he was in Turkey at this time, and his fiance was with him. And he wanted to go get documents so that he could get married to her. Now, he had to get those documents from the Saudi Arabian consulate. So he goes up to the consulate and he hands his iPhone to his fiance. I'm not really sure why he does that, but he gives it to her. He walks into the consulate and he never comes out. So the very next day, the Turkish government says, hey, what happened to this guy? He walked into your embassy. We know that he is somebody that you guys don't like and somebody that you would like to have something bad happen to him. Where is he? Now, what does this have to do with technology? Well, the Turkish government or the officials say that Khashoggi actually recorded his interrogation and his execution on his Apple Watch.
No way.
So that's the claim. So in order for that to happen, a few things have to work. Number one, his fiance has to be close enough that the Bluetooth will be able to work through the consulate walls and be able to upload that to iCloud. So that's
Right.
number one. And we know that's very unlikely. Number two, the Apple Watch could have been connected to Wi-Fi while it was inside the Saudi Arabian consulate. And that's possible if for some reason the Wi-Fi was wide open, or if Khashoggi had previously been there and somehow connected to the Wi-Fi. So that's a possibility, but also not very likely. And then the third option that lots of people have talked about is perhaps his Apple Watch was LTE enabled and it was syncing with iCloud from the moment that he walked in there and started recording. The problem is Turkey does not have LTE technology.
Oh, no.
So, anyways, the Turkish officials claim that he was recording all of this on his Apple Watch and that the assassins, I mean, we're using that term a lot on this podcast, took the Apple Watch and then used his finger to unlock it and delete certain files.
Now, could they do the Find My Apple Watch function on his iCloud to find where the body is?
That's a great idea. I don't know if anybody's looked into it. I'm sure they may have tried. Personally, I think the watch is toast and I think the body's gone. And we won't get into how that happens, although I have a forensics degree and we could have a whole other podcast on how to get rid of a body. So
take a blue barrel, put some acid in it.
Nope, doesn't work. Trust me. Okay. But anyways, we won't get into that. So what a lot of people think actually happened is that the Turkish officials have the consulate bugged. And so they've been spying on their Saudi Arabian friends for a long time.
And they heard it go down.
They heard it go down and they recorded it, and so here's the whole thing. Now, we're not going to get in all the latest political news, such as Donald Trump saying maybe it was a rogue element trying to give excuses to the Saudi Arabian government for what happened. But the technology side of that was quite interesting. And then one last story that goes along with it is a Fitbit was used to lay charges and also convict a 90-year-old man of murder.
90 years old.
Yeah, so first of all, I don't know what a 90-year-old man is doing murdering people.
Or with a Fitbit. How can he even stand up anymore?
Well, it wasn't his Fitbit. It was the woman he murdered. So it was his stepdaughter. She's 67 years old. And so what he claimed was he went and he visited his stepdaughter, and they had a nice little conversation, maybe ate some cookies, because that's what you do when you're 90. And then
Werther's Originals. And
then she walked him to the door, and he drove away. And then somebody came in and murdered her after. That was his alibi. But what the prosecutors did is they took camera footage. Now we're back to those cameras that are watching us everywhere, just like those Russian spies got caught in England. So they took camera footage, and they saw when this 90-year-old guy parked in her driveway. So they have his car there. They know when he got there, and they know when he left. And then they went to the Fitbit that his stepdaughter was wearing. And they went and they can see exactly what happened. They say the Fitbit shows her heart rate spike at 3:20 p.m., followed by a rapid slowing of her heart rate, which stopped at exactly 3:28. So that's
that's so creepy that a Fitbit can see your murder happen, right?
Yes!
I've never thought about that.
Your murder happen.
That's insane.
And then they tied that to the surveillance video, and they said, you were there! And there's also other things, like they found blood on his shirts, and, he wasn't convicted just because of the Fitbit. But 90-year-old dudes, nobody should be murdering, but you know what?
Once you're 90, you don't get a free pass.
Technology is not letting us get away with anything these days, and I'm actually kind of happy with it.
Me too. Also, I'm wearing my Fitbit anytime I go into an old folks' home.
Me too, and I'm going to have it record any interrogations or executions of myself.
Anytime I go into a consulate, I am wearing my Fitbit. Yeah. Well, that was a lot of fun. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. Also, tell your friends about our podcast. You can listen to us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and the Google Play Store with the podcast. And send us a comment at Tech Time Show PC on Twitter.
Talk to you later.